It's the vocation. It's what God has created us for and called us into. A new world of forgiveness. Learning that we are forgiven people. And learning how to be forgiving people. What could be more important than that? The story, the parable of the unforgiving servant, as we call it, that was just read among us a moment ago, falls in the church season called ordinary time. Do you know that we're in ordinary time? Actually, this is the 24th Sunday of ordinary time. The color is green. It's for growth. Day by day, row by row, inch by inch, row by row, I'm going to make this garden grow. I mean, that's ordinary time. It's day by day, learning through ordinary time what it means to be a disciple of Jesus Christ. And so the parable of the unforgiving servant falls into ordinary time. What could be more ordinary? What could be more practical? What could be something that shows up every day of our lives? Every day of our lives is an opportunity and a challenge for us to experience we are a forgiven people. We are to be forgiving people. Forgiveness is a big thing among us as Christians, and we're celebrating, as I mentioned once or twice before, the 500-year anniversary of the Protestant Reformation. It was in 1517, 500 years ago this year, that Martin Luther nailed those 95 Theses to the church door and said, these must be debated. And the thing that was probably most prominent among those 95 Theses was the idea of forgiveness cannot be bought. For it was the policy of the church to sell indulgences. In other words, you could go buy off God. You could pay money and God would forgive you. If you paid the right amount of money, you got the forgiveness. And Martin Luther said, absolutely not. All the reformers said, you can't buy God. Fortunately, the Catholic Church got rid of the practice in 1567, but in 1517, this was the major spark of the Protestant Reformation. You can't buy off God, and you can't earn. You can't earn it either. It's not a merit badge. Forgiveness is not something that's given to the good. If you're good enough, you get the merit badge. You get forgiveness. You can't buy it. You can't earn it. It's God's work. Forgiveness is God's work. I suppose growing up in the church that I did, I probably sang that old hymn. I'm sure most of you probably know it. Rock of Ages, cleft for me. I'd sung that, I don't know how many times, 100, 200 times. And then I heard a sermon in which the third verse was quoted. And for the first time in my life, I heard the words that I had sung all of my life, but I'd never heard them. The words go like this, the third verse. Nothing in my hand I bring. Simply to thy cross I cling. It's God's work. It's not our work. We can't buy it. We can't earn it. Nothing in my hand I bring, simply to thy cross. This is God's work. And God does this work well. The sign of our forgiveness is our baptism. Those of us who were baptized as infants, we were confirmed in that baptism. So baptism and confirmation become a piece together. But our baptism is the sign. We are forgiven. Martin Luther, as I mentioned a minute or two ago, had a tough time after he sparked the Protestant Reformation. For a while, he had to run for his life. He had to hide in a castle. He had some very difficult days as a result of what he had done. And during the most difficult days of his life, he would often say to himself, I am baptized. And that was the strength that led him on. I have been claimed by God. My baptism is the sign. Some people talk about this thing called habitual grace. You think of habitual, you think of the word habit. You think of habit, you think of a nun or a religious person wearing religious clothing. It could be a man or a woman. It could be a nun. It could be any kind of religious clothing. The religious clothing is worn every day. It's a habit that is worn by Catholics or Anglicans. Our baptism is our habit. We are clothed. And every day we wear it. Every day. Yeah, we still confess our sins. We never leave the need to do that. We know that we need to confess every day, every week, our sins, but we also know that we are forgiven. And our baptism is the sign that we belong to God and nothing is going to take us out of God's hands. Nothing is going to change that. We are baptized once, and if you stray, if you do bad, you don't come back and get baptized again. Baptism is a one-time thing, and it's forever. We are claimed by God. So we are forgiven people. We are. So we come to the text then today that we read, the story of the unforgiving servant. We come and hear that today as forgiven people. Maybe you know this story, or maybe this morning it was a new story for you. It's a rather straightforward parable, not very difficult to understand. Anybody can understand it. There was a king, a ruler. He called in his servants to give account and discovered that one of his servants had run up a debt, the king's debt, of an astronomical amount of money. I don't know how much it was. The conservative estimate is at least 15 years of a servant's salary. This guy had lived high. What he did with the money, we're not told. You can use your own imagination. Did he gamble it away? Did he wine women in song? Did he buy boats and motorcycles? Who knows? What we do know is that he spent the money that did not belong to him. And the king said, he's to be sold, his children, his wife, and he is to be thrown in prison. He's finished. He's done with. Well, what would you do? You're caught. He couldn't say, well, I didn't know what I was doing. He knew darn well what he was doing. He's a thief. He's a crook. He's a rascal. He does what you would do, or what I would do under the circumstances. He falls down on his knees and simply begs. Patience. I'll pay back every cent. And then something very interesting happens in the story. You could miss this if you're not careful. The king dies. I don't mean physically dies. I mean he dies being king. Because if he's going to stay king, he's going to send this guy off where he belongs. That's what kings do. This is justice. He dies being king. He looks down at this rascal and he stops being king. He dies being king. He has pity on him. And he sends him out forgiven. Free. Nothing is said about paying back any money. Nothing. He is forgiven. He is free. Can you imagine what a great moment that was in his life? Happy days are here again. The sky above is clear again. Sing a song of cheer again. Happy times, happy nights, happy days are here again. Wow, am I a happy man? Woo! And not very long after that, you see him go out and meet a fellow slave. And the fellow slave just happens to owe him a day's wage. Not that much compared to 15 years. And you're not surprised, are you? I mean, we should be surprised, but we're not surprised. What he does is, he says to him, pay your debt right now, and if you can't, you go to prison. The other slaves, the other servants around see this happening, and they can't believe it. They go to the king and they said, you know what he just did? They tell the king the whole story. This is what he did. And the king calls him back in. And it's not a good ending. The king says, I forgave you big. And you refuse to forgive even a little. And so the last thing that happens in the story, we hear the clang of a door of the prison closing, and we know that the servant is put in prison and tortured until he can pay the debt. And you know, that's going to be a pretty long time. And then Jesus finishes the story. He looks around at his friends. And he says to them, and that's what's going to happen to you unless you forgive from your heart. You know the difference between the king and the servant in the story is that the king dies being a king, but the servant stays the same. Forgiveness involves death on both sides. Both sides have to decide that they are going to be different. They're going to die the way they are for something new to happen. So, how are you doing with this thing of forgiveness? How's it going with you? You having struggle with it? Are you working at it? I hear somebody saying in my mind this morning, well, you know, I forgave that person, but I can't forget. So, who says you have to forget? Does somebody tell you? It's not in the Bible. Somebody tell you that if you forgive somebody, you have to forget? I don't think so. I hear somebody say, well, I'm working on it. I'm trying to forgive, and I'm working on it. Almost every day I work at forgiveness, but I take 2 steps forward and 1 step back. Well, that's still 1 step forward. And who said that forgiveness is going to come immediately? Inch by inch, row by row. Sometimes forgiveness takes a long time, maybe a lifetime. I hear somebody saying, well, you know, I forgave so-and-so, but I'm never going to let them in my house again. Okay. If you forgive somebody, does that mean that you have to allow them to keep harming you? Does that mean that you have to stay in a toxic relationship with somebody? I don't think so. What is forgiveness? Forgiveness is to die. It is to die to every idea that you ever had about revenge or getting back or hurting another person. You let that go. You die to that. You've heard the expression, revenge is sweet. That's the biggest lie that was ever told. Revenge is not sweet. When we forgive someone, and we don't necessarily do it fast, don't forgive too quickly. That probably means you haven't forgiven. That means you've condoned it. You overlooked it, but it's not real forgiveness. When we forgive someone, we hold on to the grievance for a while. We hold it tight. We let it speak to us. We let its message get into the very bottom of our hearts. We have been wronged. Hold on to it. Live with it for a while. And then you die. You let it go. In your own way, with as much time as you need, you let it go. But you don't let it go into thin air. You don't just let it go. You give it to Jesus. You give it to Jesus. You say, Jesus, I don't think I like this person. I know I don't love this person, and I should, but I know that I don't. But I'm going to give this person to you. I can't handle it. I don't like him, her. But I'm going to give this person to you. And I know that you will do whatever is necessary to make everything right. Forgiveness is letting go and then holding on. You let go of the grievance, you let go of the person as you tighten your grip on God. You let go and you hold on. The beautiful thing about forgiveness is that once we let it happen, it's like walking out of prison and breathing the air of freedom. we are free. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.